Um, hey, what's up, everyone? Hope you're doing good and ready for a real breakdown because there's a fresh patch for Moonlighter 2 that's worth talking through in some detail. Patch 1 landed on November 28th, 2025. The devs clearly focused on cleaning up the rough edges that made the game feel uneven for a lot of players. The big headline is a solid sweep at stuttering and overall performance issues, but underneath that, you can feel the attention going into boss encounters, combat responsiveness, controller polish, and a surprisingly thoughtful set of Steam Deck improvements that make the game feel smoother the moment you launch it. When I loaded the game after the update, the first thing I wanted to check was whether the micro stutters people kept mentioning during early launch were actually improved. Those tiny freezes might not sound dramatic, but when you're mid-fight and relying on timing, they completely break your flow. According to the devs, they went through and removed a bunch of unused or unnecessary data processes that were cluttering up the game under the hood. In real terms, that means fewer random hitches when you're dodging through a crowd of enemies or transitioning between rooms. It's the kind of fix you don't see, but you feel immediately because the whole game just breathes better. Another noticeable improvement is on the Steam Deck side, and this one is genuinely practical. The patch now sets the default deck graphics preset to FSR3 on quality instead of balanced. What that means for you is a sharper visual presentation without sacrificing stability. The deck is already a tight little device, so starting the game with an optimized preset saves you from tweaking a bunch of settings before actually playing. They also went in and polished parts of the UI that felt cramped or slightly off on the deck screen, making menus and difficulty selection cleaner and easier to navigate. All those little things stack up and make the handheld experience feel like it was actually considered rather than just inherited from the desktop version. Boss fights are another area where the patch makes a noticeable difference. Several of them were rebalanced to feel fairer, not necessarily easier, but more readable and deliberate. Some attacks now have clearer telegraphs, pacing has been adjusted so phases feel less chaotic, and damage spikes that came out of nowhere have been toned down. If you've ever had one of those moments where a boss suddenly deletes you with something you couldn't reasonably anticipate, those are the kinds of issues the patch aims to smooth out. It's still Moonlighter, so you still need to prepare and pay attention, but it no longer feels like the game is pulling cheap shots. Combat and control tuning are also part of the patch, and this one benefits players who rely heavily on controllers or the Steam Deck. Responsiveness has been tightened in areas like directional inputs, melee attack snaps, and shield behavior. There were reports from players about binding issues where certain settings didn't always stick or reloaded incorrectly. And while not every single quirk is gone, the patch addresses a good chunk of the inconsistencies. If you play on a controller, you should notice the game feeling more in sync with what your hands are doing, with fewer moments where you swear you pressed something but the game hesitated. One area that didn't get as much attention in early patch discussions, but absolutely matters, is the polish on looting and shopkeeping. The inventory and shop screens have always been important in Moonlighter, and even small usability tweaks here make a huge difference, because they're screens you interact with constantly. With cleaner readability, more reliable interactions, and smoother transitions, it reduces friction in that loop of running a dungeon, selling your haul, upgrading gear, and going back out again. The better that cycle feels, the more natural it is to stay locked in for longer sessions without noticing the hours go by. There's also been a bit of chatter around how the community has responded since the update went live, and from what I've seen, the mood has shifted in a positive direction. Early reviews were mixed because performance issues hit people differently depending on their setups, but with this patch smoothing out a lot of the most obvious problems, players are reporting a noticeably better experience. It's always a good sign when you can feel a game stabilizing this early after its launch window, because it shows the team is treating this stage seriously and responding quickly to feedback. Altogether, this patch feels like a meaningful early course correction, the kind of update that tackles both the stuff you immediately notice and the stuff you only realize was an issue once it's fixed. You get smoother gameplay, bosses that feel more intentionally designed, cleaner inputs, better deck defaults, and UI tweaks that reduce friction across your runs. If you've stepped away from Moonlighter 2 because the early bumps threw you off, this feels like the right moment to jump back in and see how much has changed.